welcome to Friends of Figma London. Today I'm very excited. We have three fantastic speakers and we're going to be talking about ethical design. It's something that I think we should all be on top of, keeping tabs on the industry as it shapes, regardless of whether that's accessibility or otherwise. And I think we can learn a lot from our speakers this evening. I'm very excited. I haven't seen the talks yet myself, which makes it even more exciting for me as we go through the session. I'm Louis Oriash, and I'm Figma's designer advocate for Europe or EMEA region more broadly. And you can find me on Twitter over here if you want to see some design memes in action or some Figma tips more broadly. Today's speakers are Nat Buckley and Jack Hone from Bulb and Bradley Gabarin from MetaLab. An excellent speaker list. Can't wait to see what they have in store for us. So I'm going to hand it over to them. Nat and Jack are up first.
Cool. Let me just present our talk. All right. If everyone can see, then I think, Jack, over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to take it from the top. All right. Well, thanks for having us. We're Nat and Jack, as Louis said. I'm a senior product designer at Bulb, and Nat is our head of design. Give him a little wave again. There you go. All right. Next slide. So we're going to talk about ethical design, what it means to Bulb. And I just want to introduce Bulb a little bit first. So we're an energy company based in Bishopsgate, just up the road from Shoreditch. We've got about 1.6 million members across the UK and then startup operations in France, Texas and Spain. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the energy we supply as well. So next slide. So we supply 100% green energy. That means 100% renewable electricity, 100% renewable carbon neutral gas. And this is actually a photo of one of the wind farms that we work with in the Northeast. And so our goal or our mission is to bring affordable green energy to the mainstream with this really simple design. Started a few years ago, but we're really getting mainstream now. The big, hairy, ambitious goal is to help 100 million people lower their bills and their carbon emissions by 2030. But yeah, so our goal or our role goes beyond just supplying energy. We're going to talk about a little bit later about how we're an energy company and our role in energy supply a little bit more. Next slide, Matt. Cool. So I wanted to mention the fact we're a B Corp as well, because we're really proud of the fact. We're actually the first B Corp to become a certified B Corp. Sorry, first energy supplier to become a B Corp in the UK. That basically means we've been audited by a third party to say that we give as much consideration to our social and environmental impact. I'll have a beer, yeah, if they're going round, as our financial returns. So yeah, a couple of the B Corps, Kickstarter, Finisterre, Pip and Nut, and Body Shop. Cool.
Very nice. Thank you, Jack. I'm going to talk a little bit about what ethical design really means to us. And to sort of paint a bit of a picture, I just want to share with you how everyone needs energy to live, but nobody really enjoys thinking about utilities. And I want to get into a bit of a detail about why people might not want to or not be able to enjoy thinking about energy quite as much as we do. And there are plenty of reasons. One of them, that there are just so many demands on people's time and attention. People have jobs, they have hobbies, they have goals, responsibilities, kids, pets, stuff is happening in their lives. So often engaging with energy happens because it's a must rather than something that people enjoy choosing. Although, of course, you get people like us who probably do enjoy thinking about it in a great level of detail. But the picture is a little bit more complicated. Many adults, at least in the UK, don't really have the reading or numeracy skills needed to understand utility bills. And I found a bunch of different stats supporting this, but I don't think that it's really the numbers necessarily themselves that matter. I think what matters is if we're thinking about designing for everyone who needs energy, we also have to think about people who might not necessarily might struggle to understand some of the concepts a bit more. And I think this becomes really clear when you search online for guides to utility bills, because you'll find a lot of examples just like this, where you have a sort of like a typical utility bill or an example bill, or even like a real bill from a specific company, and it will be annotated where different sections will be explained, jargon broken down, calculations sort of explained. And the fact that so many of these kinds of guides exist, I think just shows that there's a real unmet need there, because it can be very difficult to get your head around like what all of this means, like which parts of it do you need to pay attention to. So it's obviously quite challenging. But then if you consider that 16% of working age adults, at least in the UK, live with a disability. This might impact them in lots of different ways, because there are lots of different disabilities. So it might mean that they have less time to spend on things like basic necessities of life, or it might mean that the way they direct their attention is impacted, or they have less energy. So there are just like tons of ways in which this can impact how someone is willing or able to engage with energy. And then another aspect is the financial. Here's something that we heard from a research participant. I wake up at 2 a.m. thinking, right, I need to pay that bill. I need this. This is going out today and I can't afford it. And lots of people have these worries. I think the statistic I was able to dig up was 50% of adults in the UK don't really have enough savings to cover an unexpected bill of £300. So this is sort of the bag, it isn't that it's always that all these things sort of smush together and affect the same person, but different people might experience different parts of these during the course of their lives. And this really matters to us because we are designing for everyone. So for people who are busy, for people who are not interested, for people who don't have the skills, who have the worries, and so on, we want to give them all a great experience, regardless of how interested they are. So for us, it seems like the ethical thing to do is to make managing your energy really, really simple, because that's what designing for everyone means. And we do this by leaning on quite a few principles that we'll talk through in details. So I'm going to start with the first principle, which is answer first. I'm going to dive into this one using an example of our efforts of designing for a smart pay-as-you-go plan. Smart pay-as-you-go is a different way of paying for energy. Before smart meters existed, you used on this particular type of plan, you used to have this key or card pictured here, where you would take them to a shop and you would prepay for your energy, sort of like you pay for your groceries, and then you take it home, put in your meter, and then your energy would be available to you to use. Now with the advent of smart meters, like this is a little bit more accessible, because you can do it over the app, but the principle remains the same. You prepay for your energy. And some people really love this approach. Here's a quote from somebody from a research group who said, you know what you're spending every day, every week, so you can keep on top of it. So this kind of like sense of control is something that brings people to it. But members on this plan, and we call our customers members, by the way, because we're kind of making green energy successful together. So it's really important to us that they're part of our mission. But our members on this particular plan, they tend to know exactly where their money is going. So they know how much it costs to make a cup of tea, or they know how much it costs to run a bath. And they get really good at estimating, if I put £5 on my meter, like how long is that going to last me? But that gets a little bit more complicated in the winter with seasonal changes, especially if there are any lifestyle changes. That estimation might not be quite as accurate. So for us, when thinking about designing an app experience for this particular product, the main question we wanted to answer was, how long is my money going to last? And give our members this answer very directly. So applying this principle of answer first led us to communicate the answer very straightforwardly, visually, and with words. Why visually? Because visual processing is a lot faster than reading. So in this particular case, you can see on the right-hand side, the graphic in both of these cards. shows you how many days you have left of using energy. And somebody might come to this app, open it up, at a glance see where they are very quickly, and then move on and do something else. And our designer, Yevgeny, who I think is on the call, he came up with this. We tested different ways of presenting this information. So this is one of the early sketches where you can see the balance going down. So the usage, the way you use energy every day sort of affects it, and you can see how much is left. But looking at this, we kept asking, is this approach answering the right question? Are we, is this as simple as it could be? So through playing with different concepts and testing them, we got to the final approach. And members tell us that it's really clear. There are lots of really interesting things happening behind the scenes here, but I just want to draw attention to a small design detail. When there's more than 7 days left, we just show a full circle rather than having the segments, because from research we know that's how people think about the energy, that anything over 7 days is a large enough buffer not to need to worry about it or not think about it. And from 7 days on, it becomes really useful to have like a sense of exactly what's going on. So that's the principle of answer first applied to a real product. The other principle I want to tell you about is one thing at a time. And I'm going to use an example of free support services that we provide for members who need them. And those support services include a bunch of different things, but some examples to give you are if there's an engineer coming to your house, they can use a code word to make sure that you understand that they come in from us, or you can nominate someone else to look after your energy, or you can get home visits to take meter readings so that we understand how much energy you're using if you can't access your own meter, or we can provide support during emergencies or power cuts, or free gas safety checks. There's a whole menu of services that we can provide to help people manage their energy. But to suggest which services might be helpful to them, we actually need to know quite a lot about them and about their needs. And there are lots of reasons why we might offer some kind of support. For example, someone's over 60, or they have a very small child, or they're living with a disability or have a long-term health problem, or maybe something recently happened in their life that really changed, what's going on, like maybe they had a bereavement or a job loss or something like that. So we do actually need to ask quite a lot of questions. But we found that when applying this principle of one thing at a time, we managed to keep questions really simple, even though it meant the entire application had more steps. And we did this by grouping thematically sort of similar things together. So here we're asking about your circumstances and how they might impact how you manage your energy. So this is about things that might change over time. And visual communication is a really important thing here as well. So we've used illustrations to help explain what is being asked. Sticking to this one thing at a time principle meant that creating illustrations for each question was more straightforward. And in some ways, they really help reinforce the meaning, even if English isn't your first language necessarily. While we were working on this, we also took the opportunity to simplify the language. We consulted with NHS X guidelines. We talked to experts and made sure that we use the terms that people actually use so that they were really plainly understood. And I think it's really clear that this particular part of product is especially aimed at vulnerable people who might have access needs or be in a slightly challenging situation. But everyone benefits from simpler products. So the impact of this form was that signups massively went up, and we were much more successful at getting the right services to people who needed them. But more than just numbers, one of our research participants said, "I'm glad you're doing this. Seems like you're doing everything that you can do." So I think what we also managed to achieve is to show someone or make someone feel that we actually cared. And that is really important too. Jack, over to you.
All right, thank you, Nat. I'm going to take you through principle number 3, and that's direction over choice. What we mean by that is sort of being really purposeful with the features and the product decisions that we make. Really thinking about simplicity and choosing simplicity over functionality. Sometimes it's just in the content that we're writing. But yeah, more often it's sometimes in choosing features. So I'm going to talk it through in the context of our energy usage charts. So we jump to the next slide, Nat. Yeah, so much like tracking how much you exercised or how much screen time you've been spending on Figma, our usage charts can help you gain a better understanding of how you use energy. So you can see when you're using it, when you're peaking, and different times of the day, and then hopefully help our members make a informed decision about products to use or times of day to use electricity. So it answers that question that a lot of our members have, all of our members have: how much does my energy actually cost? And that's the main focus. But to get to that, it took a little bit of work. So jump to the next slide. Our energy bills measured in kilowatt hours, and the way it works is we track how many kilowatt hours you've been using across the month, and we times that by the tariff that we charge you, and then charge you that at the end of the month. I mean, it sounds kind of simple, sounds like kind of complex. But yeah, what is a kilowatt hour? I think these are things that, as Nat was saying at the beginning, a lot of people just have no understanding of and no desire to have an understanding. So, and no time to even learn about it if we did a good job of telling them about it. So next slide. So we decided basically not to show it all. It sounds quite simple, but as Nat was saying, there's a real cross-section of members, types of members that we have. People who are really keen on learning about their energy usage, and the people that are less engaged. And so this interface like really serves the less engaged people to make sure that everything they see here is understandable and simple. So we did look into the feedback, and we found that it was actually a really important decision to not include the kilowatt hours unit. We came to this conclusion that it was more important to create a safe space for our members so they could feel confident and leave the app feeling that they have full control and there's nothing beyond their understanding. So next slide. And it really pays off. So we also collect feedback in the app by a little feedback form. And this is just one of the quotes. So I promise it's not a plant. It does sound quite good. I think it's great, really easy to understand, really clear navigation controls, doesn't require any complex thought, and you can just quickly and easily see your usage. Perfect. So yeah, we're really proud. Into the next section. Thank you. So next up, transparency. And to us, that means being really open and honest with our members. Sometimes it, maybe even if it could on the surface look like it might hinder growth, but creating that sort of creative constraint allows us to like really push the envelope. So I'm going to talk about it in the context of car charging. So next slide. This is sort of hot off the press, basically. We launched our car charging experience publicly last week. And this is what I was talking about earlier, about Bulb going beyond just supplying energy. Energy is becoming more complex and people need to make informed decisions about how they use energy and the environment. So we recognized this growth in electric vehicles and decided we had a place to offer something and to simplify the experience for members. So a few months ago, we decided to double down on electric vehicles, pulled a green team together. And now if you have an electric car, you can open up the Bulb app and you can link your EV, your electric vehicle, to the Bulb app. You can see how much charging costs, you can see how much charge you have right now, and you can schedule a charge to charge in the middle of the night when energy is cheaper and greener. But what does all that have to do with transparency? I'm bringing it back, don't worry. So because we wanted to work really quickly and get something out there, and growth was sort of exploding, we decided to work with a third party that basically connects into all the different car vendors. There's many out there, and so it's a job in itself just to connect into like Renault and Audi and Vauxhall. So we have a partner that manages all of that user data and then passes it on to us to display in the app. But that sort of poses an interesting question. Are we really open with this partnership, or do we brand it really boldly and make it really clear, use our illustration style all the way through? But because of our principle of transparency, we decided, next slide, to celebrate our partnership. So yeah, this is eNode's little logo here. We introduce them in the text below. We say we use this illustration style to sort of make the partnership feel really showcase the partnership that we have. We work like every day with these people. So we wanted to show how much we trust them, and that our members should as well. And so it does mean moving out of the Bulb app or into a separate experience. So we wanted to guide people along the way. If you jump to the next slide. And we decided basically a clear handover makes it obvious where the member is. Again, it sounds kind of simple, but there's definitely versions of this type of experience where you're linking different things, where it's not so clear. So right at the top, we're showing it in in-app browser. And if you jump to the next slide, we also celebrate our partnership with eNode as well, with a little footer, just saying powered by eNode, and really bring it back to Bulb's electric vehicle connection partner. Cool. So that clear handover is really important. And then finally for transparency, if you jump to the next slide, that principle of transparency really pushed us to be more creative. So normally when you land on one of these permission screens, you just have a long list of sort of concerning permissions that you need to sign away: your location, your data, and so it can be a bit scary. So we decided to shift this focus onto what is the thing that you're going to get access to, and list out underneath what's the data that you need to give us. And hopefully this proves a better experience for members. As I said, it's out there now. So if you do have an EV, electric vehicle, sign up, link your vehicle. Thanks. On to the next slide.
Okay. And the final principle that we have to share with you is using our personality and positive energy to bring a little bit of life and excitement, and hopefully understanding where it's really appropriate. And I want to use an example of our carbon calculator here. Carbon calculator, you can find it on our website. It's a quiz that asks you basically a few questions about your lifestyle and gives you an overview of your carbon footprint and where it's coming from, and gives you also an option to offset that carbon footprint. Carbon footprint and offsetting, at least to us, probably mean a lot. We talk about these things every day, but they're not necessarily things that everyone in the UK has heard of or has had conversations about. And although there is a lot of interest in these topics, they can be sometimes talked about with quite a lot of jargon, perhaps. So I think there's definitely opportunity to make this topic a little bit more accessible. So our principle of positive energy makes it a lot easier to engage with topics in general. This topic specifically, I think it's because that sort of sense of fun can open up the opportunity to maybe learn about something you felt unsure about, or make something feel just a little bit more engaging than it would have if it were handled in a really dry way. What you can see on the screen here is an animation that is essentially a response to your input. So this is a question from the carbon calculator asking you how often you eat beef, and the more frequent meals a week that include beef you select, the taller the burgers that get. So as you interact with it, you can really feel that, like, oh, this is obviously not super serious. But I think this sort of really positive, really fun approach really helps to reinforce that this is not a judgmental space. It puts you in the frame of mind where maybe you're a little bit more open to learning about this or hearing more about this, because it's an enjoyable experience in and of itself, and that feels almost rewarding for taking positive action. So, although there are tons of places where, of course, it's not appropriate for our tone of voice or for our visual language to have this sort of really playful approach, I think it's also true that we do look for opportunities to bring this positive energy because I think in general, anything to do with climate and energy can sometimes sound a bit complicated or a bit scary. So if there are ways that we can make this a little bit easier or a little bit more enjoyable, then that really feels like a job well done. So that's it for the principles. Jack, over to you.
Yeah, that's it. That's where I jump in to say we are growing. So if you're interested, you like the look of the principles that we hold ourselves to, yeah, shoot me an email. I'm also on the Friends of Figma Slack channel. Um, Even if you just want to chat, I'd really, yeah, love to hear what you think. So yeah, thank you very much, and yeah, we'll go to questions, I guess.
Thank you both so much. That was a lovely, lovely presentation. And again, very transparent as one of your principles. Thank you so much. We're actually going to run straight through to Bradley's presentation. And I will be posting the FigJam file back into the chat for any people that have joined after we started. So you can add your questions in there and I'll do a bumper Q&A session at the end. Bradley, are you ready to go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Over to you.
So I want to be totally honest. I'm on the fence about which talk to share right now. So I'm going to go with this one and hope that there is enough, because there's a little bit of overlap basically between what I was planning to share. So, but let me go back here. All right, I'm assuming everyone can see my screen okay? Perfect. So the talk that I'd like to basically share today is going to be about designing for anxiety. But before we do sort of jump in, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an intro to me. So first of all, hey, I'm Bradley. I'm a design lead at MetaLab, and I'm half Egyptian. And this picture of me when I was about 5 in Egypt is about the coolest picture of me that ever has or ever will exist. I now live in Cambridge with my partner and our dog. And I couldn't mention a dog without showing puppy tags here. And I particularly love this picture because we're both pulling like the same facial expression. So it's pretty cool. And so first of all, let's jump into the talk. I'm gonna ask the question, what is anxiety? Well, it's me, you're looking at it. But seriously, the actual definition, anxiety is a feeling of general unease, right? So this could be worry, it could be fear, or it could be that kind of horrible knot of butterflies that we get in our stomachs sometimes. And at some point in our lives, we all have had and we all will have anxiety because it's a very natural response to perceived danger. And for many, many years, it's what has kept us alive. Without it, our ancestors would have been running towards lions, trying to cuddle them, rather than running away from them. And as good as this hug looks, like I wouldn't recommend trying it. In the modern world, we don't have so many lions to run from, thankfully, but anxiety is still a very real thing, especially after the last few years that we've had. And come on, did you think we'd make it through a whole talk of anxiety without mentioning the big sort of pandemic-shaped elephant in the room? COVID has actually had a real impact, though, jokes aside. And bereavement, isolation, loss of income, fear, it's just this general collective trauma has triggered mental health problems like anxiety in many, many more people. And it has exacerbated those problems greatly for the people who were already suffering. I'm gonna pull on sort of my own sort of case study on this one as well. Personally, I've always struggled with social anxiety, but it was one of those things I could kind of like just keep going through and like, it's fine, I'll like, white knuckle it for the evening. But actually now going into large gatherings of people like this is quite frankly terrifying. And to be totally honest, I think I'd rather take my chances with the lion, especially if the lion was like this one. So I'm gonna stop sort of rambling here and bring this back and sort of say, what actually does this all have to do with design? And for me, it is like that key word that designers love to use so much is empathy. And one thing that I've sort of pitched for a long time, and actually one thing that Nat and Jack, you called out that Bulb are doing, is that as designers, we shouldn't just be considering the people that use our products in the isolated moment that they decide to interact with them. Instead, what we should really be doing is considering that the person behind that screen and interaction lives a full life with a spectrum of their own sort of interactions and friends and worries and emotions, priorities, and really everything that makes us human. And anxiety is a core part of what makes us human. As much as sometimes we might really want to, we can't ignore it. And while I'm not advocating that anxiety comes to like the absolute forefront of all our design and product decisions, what I am suggesting is that we bring it into the conversation more than it may be appearing today. Critically, it's a core part of understanding what makes us, us, and without having those sort of baselines to build from, the products that we create will never truly be driven by empathy. So what does anxiety look like? Can I reuse the me joke again here? Is it no? All right, that's fine. Well, to be honest, it's a really big umbrella. And I tried to find a bigger umbrella, but the Giphy plugin on Pix just wouldn't deliver. Anxiety covers things like social anxiety, panic disorders, agoraphobia, claustrophobia, health anxiety, and so many more, right down to just that tiny little like niggling feeling in the pit of your stomach that, hey, something's not right here. And in today's world, we are all dealing with an underlying sense of anxiety, whether we're aware of it or not, right? We've got COVID, we've got the climate disaster, we've got Brexit. I'm getting a little anxious just listing these things off. But for those people who do suffer from anxiety disorders as well, like all of these things are just compounding and amplifying massively. And the toll on our mind can be huge. It's kind of a really used analogy, but if we think of our brains as a bit like a computer, it's like we've already got 100 Chrome tabs open at any one point in time before we try to do anything in the day. For those of you using MacBooks, this means like, you know, like fans on full force, the thing's lighting up, it's about to take off. So it's pretty understandable that actually just opening one more thing, one small inconvenience or one piece of information overload can tip us from running with a lot of noise and heat, but you know, still kind of running all the way to down. And so the bulk of what I'd like to talk about today is really, how do we avoid this? Hopefully, I've kind of given a good overview of the why we need to be thinking about anxiety within our products. And there is so much to interpret and build around when it comes to specific use cases and interactions. But rather than going into a bunch of case studies, really what I wanted to do was share some of the key principles to have in mind and how you might be able to apply them so that we can all start building right away. And the first thing, and the first sort of principle here is going to be mindful of urgency. Not everything needs a countdown clock. All over the internet, and actually all over sort of sales and really anywhere, right? Urgency is used to create scarcity and drive action. It like latches onto that sense of FOMO that we've all experienced. And it does the job really, really well, right? It's one hell of a conversion tool. And in instances, wow, where urgency is genuine and warranted, it is a really good thing to be communicating. And actually, it's critical to communicate when something is really urgent. But in those instances, we do need to be cautious of tone of voice and follow-up. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Instances of fake urgency, however, are 100% something we want to avoid. While it might still work really well as a conversion tool, we're quickly drifting away from this like goal of delivering value to people and beginning to prey on the people who are most vulnerable to those mechanisms. And a large portion of that are people with anxiety. So if something is genuinely urgent, you can communicate the urgency kindly and make the whole experience a little bit kinder by including why something is urgent. Like, what is the time boxed impact? What is the thing that we are butting up against, not just an arbitrary countdown clock? Second to that, what happens if they don't do it? And this is important because something that is really urgent to you as a business or a product might actually not be important to the person who is using the product. And actually right now, because of everything else they've got going on, they're okay with making that trade-off. And then if they are okay with making that trade-off, providing alternative routes. There is nothing in tech within reason that once it's done, it can't be undone. And so for anybody who isn't able to meet that urgency deadline, look at supporting them with alternate routes that they can follow up later. And if you're looking at this list and feeling like, hey, on this thing I worked on, we can't communicate all three because of X, Y, or Z, then actually maybe what we should be asking is, how critical is that thing really? Is it actually urgent? We should always be looking to give people more than enough time to complete tasks. And I guess my whole point with this here is like, let's not put more stress and pressure out into the world where it's not needed. The second point here is to be predictable and reliable, which is actually just generally good advice. But when it comes to products, it's really a key for psychological safety. We should be looking to make actions and their consequences clear and build upon a person's existing mental models and understanding of the product or the world. When we do introduce new patterns or things that may be counterintuitive, which at times is necessary, we should make a real point of highlighting it and communicating that thing clearly. And this point is particularly important for products with more serious consequences. If we think about medical products, financial products, legal, business, because the emotional impact of making a wrong move is much higher when there may be serious consequences from it. And in these areas, we can support people by adding frictions to those high impact moments to make sure that we give them the space to breathe and really understand the consequences of what it is that they're doing. But it's just as important, actually, when it comes to consumer-facing products. For example, if I'm going to share something on social media, it should be abundantly clear to me who is going to be able to see that content. The privacy controls around content sharing is something that we'd want to keep very, very consistent, so there are no surprises. And it is never something that should be changed without the person explicitly doing it themselves. We want to make sure that we give them absolute clarity and absolute control. You can imagine that if we started not doing that, the consequences could lead to some pretty big mishaps. The third point is to support and empower people, which is actually also just generally good advice. This is like half tech talk, half general life. And I guess what I mean by that is like, tech is incredibly deeply ingrained into our culture at this point, and just about everything that we do. And I'm going to mention COVID one more time. The pandemic has only amplified that tenfold. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? But it does mean that we have a huge opportunity and even a responsibility to be building each other up and to support and empower the people that are using our products wherever we can see that opportunity to do so. And depending on your product space, this might look drastically different. A few of my favorite examples here. On the left, we have Monzo's gambling transaction block. And this is something that the team introduced that is actually huge for empowering people to take control of their own sort of finances and spending, particularly those who might be suffering from things like gambling addiction. But more so than just allowing them to block gambling transactions, they've gone a step further and created more work from themselves, going the extra mile for their customers by actually making the pathway to turning it off be to chat with a support specialist and then also have a 48-hour cooldown. In a much lighter note, MyFitnessPal's notifications are, again, one of my favorite examples of this. They turn off automatically when they're not being used. And this is incredible. Just like if we think implications aside, I appreciate this so much because how often do you have an app that will continuously send you notifications but every time you swipe them away, and each time you're like, oh, I should really turn those off, but you don't. And so MyFitnessPal, kind of like going above and beyond, went ahead and recognized this and built in a really it's an interaction I didn't even have to think about. They said, hey, these aren't useful for you. We're going to turn them off. And that's something that's so small, but it feels so big. And not only does it have a huge impact, just my phone's not buzzing 3 times a day needlessly, but also the brand equity that builds. Like, I'm here in a talk, like, raving about MyFitnessPal. I've never worked with MyFitnessPal, but it's great. Neither of these things are directly within the scope of the product. In fact, I would imagine that actually both of them probably impacted metrics in a pretty big way. But the impact for real people and on their lives is what drove them. And that is the most important bit when we think about the space. And so what I really think about this is like asking yourself, what could we do to make other people's lives better? And if you see an opportunity to go the extra mile, do it. You won't regret it. Even if you're building the really scrappy product, very often it's those tiny low lift things that can actually add up and have a huge impact. And that's why it's so important that we keep all of these things in mind. And then the last sort of principle that I'm going to talk through here is to communicate well, as I hope I'm doing. And transparency is a running theme throughout everything here. Transparency is really important. But it's not enough for us to be transparent in gray on gray text, the small print, or legalese. And the principal idea here is that there really shouldn't be any doubt in a person's mind about the information that they're receiving. Important information shouldn't only appear once. It should be readily and easily accessible. The language should be incredibly easy to understand and communicated very clearly. And it should be delivered at the right moment in the experience. It should be timely and relevant to what it is that they're doing. And it might mean adding additional screens or steps. And as we saw in the Bulb sort of case study, sometimes that works out even better anyway. But adding friction is a valuable trade-off if the end result is good understanding. Because the impact of not doing so is far more costly than the result of a few extra seconds or one more click. To bring a few examples forward, this might look like allowing somebody to review a form in its entirety before they submit it, and then telling them while we have them there what the next steps will be. Do they need to do anything else? Can they expect a follow-up? Laying it out sort of very, very clearly and in context. Or it might be as simple as adding a step to the account deletion flow that communicates what will be done with their data on the platform and when. Are we going to hold on to it forever? I hope not. Each of those examples are really just about tying up loose ends, and I think that's something that is really sort of critical to keep in mind. We should really be looking to recap the input, communicate the consequences, and then provide the next steps. And with that in mind, I'm going to recap the input. So the four sort of principles and themes here is to be mindful of urgency, be predictable and reliable, support and empower people, and communicate well. And a lot of these things really just come down to elevating the person as a whole in the design process and letting everything else just take a back seat for a while. While there is absolutely constraints and KPIs and metrics and roadmaps and goals and pressure and the engineer that doesn't want to do the thing with every project, but like as designers, we talk about empathy a lot. So we really should be the ones championing it within our products very strong. I'm also a big believer in sort of practicing what you preach. So I rewrote this talk about 5 hours ago. And so please forgive any dodgy formatting. And yeah, thank you so much. And as always, like we got questions next, but always happy to continue the conversation on Twitter as well. Handles on the screen.
Yay. Thank you very much, Bradley. That was fantastic, given that you did rewrite it a couple of hours ago. I think as a present, I might just buy you a tiger anyway and see how you get on with it.
That sounds fantastic.
It'll be a gift. So I'm going to do the Q&A flip. So we're going to start with Bradley for your questions. And of course, if anybody has any other questions, feel free to come off mute, write in the chat or write in the FigJam file. So we're going to go, we're going to come in hot, the question here, Bradley. And the question is, how do you push back against product managers that are sort of driving metrics, aggressive metrics, when it comes to sort of urgency, signing up, getting high revenue points, that sort of thing? How do you push back on that?
So it's really hard is the thing. And I think I've actually earned myself a bit of a reputation for being the person that will stand there and block whole sort of projects because it's just going after the wrong thing. It's not easy, but I've always found like the best way of doing it is through action, not just by saying like, hey, no, this is wrong, we need to be thinking about this thing. But actually, if you can take the inputs and the metrics and sort of what it is that they're trying to drive and build in a lot of what it is that it means to sort of design for mindful design and design ethics, I think very often there are middle grounds that can be achieved. But I do think like that sort of natural tension is really difficult, particularly if the metrics that they're going after aren't value-based metrics, but they're more like performance-based metrics like daily active people. That is a really hard situation. But you know, trying to work together and drive it in the right direction as much as you can would be my sort of advice.
Yeah, opening the door to communication, I guess, is not a bad thing to do.
Communicate well.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to flip the question over to Nat and Jack now. So you use research a lot to inform your design choices, which is obviously fantastic and a really great principle to be living by. Have you ever disagreed with any findings or found that the findings are not shocking in air quotes, but so far removed from what you expected, and then you've had to implement that because you're going with the consensus of the findings?
I actually can't think of an example where like we disagreed with the consensus of the findings. We've certainly had projects where like we discovered something maybe slightly surprising or something that got us to rethink some of the assumptions we made or rethink the direction we're going in. But I think it's always the case that research sort of shows the right way. We're not here to push my opinions onto our product. It's to discover like what is it, like what are the needs that we're designing for, and how to best achieve clarity and simplicity and get people to understand what it is that we're trying to do. So yeah, I can't really think of an example of like, I disagree with the research, we should do something else.
I suppose kind of related then is that a lot of us have had situations internally where a higher up has decided that they want to build this feature because that's what they think is what the company needs. How do you then convince somebody that we should actually go through this research phase first, even though somebody has possibly already decided that we're going to build this thing?
I think it's always about weighing up the risks. The risk of us building the wrong thing or building it in the wrong way just translates into wasted money. So I think that's always the way to bring research and consideration into the process. Like if a decision for whatever reason feels risky, then like we can try to de-risk it and then learn from it and then do the right thing. I think that would be my angle always.
That's a great angle. And just to follow up on that one, we've got a question in from Tia. I think that's how you pronounce it. Bulb in particular, you're sort of bound by energy prices that are potentially out of your control. How do you as designers navigate those potentially dissatisfying elements of the product, because you're having to sort of inherit these other things that you're sort of managing from a product perspective?
That's a really, really big challenge, but I think the way to think about this is this something that is totally out of our control. Someone you mentioned here, the increasing energy prices, they affect every supplier, so we're facing exactly the same challenges. I think as long as we are clear on what's going on, like help you understand like the prices, your usage, like what that means, and so on, then I think we're doing our best. Yeah, obviously we can't necessarily change what's happening globally. I have to admit that I don't even fully understand the wholesale market, but I'm sure there are people who are really fascinated by it and watch it, and are really interested in that could probably tell you more about it. But yeah, I think it's just let's keep doing our best, keep making things as simple as possible, as easy to understand as possible, and communicate what's going on. I think that's the best we can do. Just be transparent about it.
Right. I really like how you're all kind of aligning back to these principles that you've been talking about, which shows that you do actually live by them, which is really, really reassuring. Bradley, we're going to flip it back to you. Actually, you've got a question coming in. How helpful or necessary is it to work with sort of trained psychologists, mental health researchers, whilst you're building these products as a designer?
Oh, that's such a good question. I would say it's always helpful, but to the extent that you should be investing in it really depends on the extent that your product actually touches the sort of areas of anxiety or mental health problems directly. So I think I would advocate that every designer should go and take like just a general sort of training around mental health. It'll help you a lot, just even in your day-to-day lives. But further than that, I think there are definite instances where actually working very closely with mental health professionals is key. So a few years ago, I worked on a product that was basically providing mental health support for teenagers, and it was like a connection app with a therapist. And so with that, we actually brought on multiple sort of therapists, obviously for research sessions, but also had basically it was like an advisory board where we brought them on to basically gut check us and veto anything. Like we said, hey, look, we're going to design this to the best of our design knowledge and product knowledge. But what we want from you is to make sure that our products are at no point risking doing harm. So anywhere where you see us drifting or anything like that, like shout and sort of like put us back on the right path. And so, yeah, I would say like, if you've got the time, like do it anyway, but it's not something that will fit into every project unless it kind of needs it.
Yeah, and I presume that the justification for spending the money is also quite a hard challenge to justify as a designer. But I presume getting the team behind this initiative is where you want to put your energy.
And I think it's like the 80-20 principle as well, right? It's like so much can be achieved with just a baseline level of knowledge and understanding that can then be applied. It's like just even bringing it into the conversation is a huge step forwards outside of like just not sort of recognizing it.
Awesome. All right, we're going to flip it up slightly and still stick on you, Bradley, for the next question. The features that you showed about sort of going the extra mile are incredibly valuable for users who potentially are vulnerable or who could go down sort of a negative path. With that in mind, and with startups generally wanting to make as much money as possible as fast as possible, how do you balance the restriction of growth potentially by limiting the amount of features that people have access to?
Like, so it's a good question. And to me, this one just comes down to fundamentally what type of company and what type of product do you want to be. You can see some companies, they take a very strong stance on actually, no, we're here because we care about the people and we care about driving value, and sort of true value, not sort of like just growth for ourselves. And then you do get sort of companies who are just like, no, growth at all costs. And so it's kind of that old adage, like you can lead a horse to water, but like you can't make it drink. And it's like a very similar thing. And so, you know, personally, I'm in a position where I won't work with companies that aren't providing true value and will sort of like not sort of work with these principles, or at least I try not to. But if you are working at a company where it is very sort of like metrics driven at all costs, my biggest sort of piece of advice is, you know, just sort of keep fighting the good fight, like keep raising these flags. And as long as you're talking about it and bringing attention to these things, like you're doing everything you can and you're doing a great job. Yeah.
Nice. This question, I suppose, is for anyone who wants to take it, is as we're sort of trying to build these more empathetic, ethical, considerate products and apps and websites, and ultimately thinking that maybe people do have lives outside of our products that they want to go and live and not get hooked into our products. How do we justify potentially reducing the feature set that is on offer to ensure people can go and live their lives? I know that's possibly an impossible question to answer. So if anyone does want to share anything on that, feel free to jump in.
I have thoughts, but Nat, do you want to go first? Because I just spoke for a few minutes.
The thing that comes to mind is that things that sort of look and feel simple, or rather, yeah, things that look simple are perceived as simple. So I think there is probably a lot of value in removing features that sort of might end up making appear a product more complicated than it necessarily is. I can't remember what this concept was called, but I was reading a blog post by someone who was talking about just that, like reviewing product features regularly and trimming them down just to the bare essentials and removing the things that are not necessarily being used. And I just really like that idea. I think it could potentially work really great in principle because it helps you focus on the things that really matter and reduce your maintenance costs. So there's definitely a lot of potential in this idea, I think.
Definitely agree with that. And I think the other thing that stands out to me is like as a company or as a team is aligning, and I mentioned this a few times, but aligning on like an actual value-based metric, which is harder than just seeing like, daily active people or monthly active people or engagement, but thinking like actually what value does my product provide and how can we build a metric around that, and then building for that. And I think like Twitter Fleets is a great example of that, right? They wanted to create a way that provided like more conversation and more connection. It didn't work, so they removed it. Perfect. Like, and they spoke about it in the open too. Like it was fantastic to see.
Yeah, totally agree. And then just one more question, unless anybody does jump in from the audience. This one is back at the Bulb team. And you mentioned on the survey example that you built that you ended up actually building more steps into that form, which when I was listening, I thought, surely that's most designers' nightmare, is ending up with more design. How did you navigate that? How did you justify that? Was there any restriction from the team? What was that process like?
So Shannon Ashley, who I think might be in the call, she designed that flow and she went through loads of rounds of research with different participants and like really validated the concept that if you make something like, this each individual question feel really simple, then it feels like less hassle to go even through a longer form than it is to consider like one more, or fewer very complicated questions. There is an actual bias. I can't remember what it's called, but it's something like if something looks simple, it like people perceive it as simple. And I think making something look simple like requires you to like chunk things into smaller pieces. But yeah, research validated it, and this is the kind of approach that we now use very frequently. I think I would be wary of maybe like applying it to everything blanket. So as like a blanket rule, this always needs to be supported by like, oh, does it actually work in this particular context? But I think in that particular use case, and we have a few other use cases where that approach just works really, really well. So I think maybe in some ways like redefined what like simple and easy, maybe how we interpret that.
Great. I think that's a lovely place for us to wrap things up. Thank you, Nat. Thank you, Jack. And thank you, Bradley. And thank you, everybody who attended. That was a lovely couple of talks. I really enjoyed them, and the Q&A also. Yeah, thanks again. And we'll see you all very soon.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.